On the 31st of December 1885, he returned from the dentist in good spirits. He ate well that evening. He was by all accounts improving. Those who saw him that night noted he seemed almost his old self, a man recovering, settling, returning to the rhythms of ordinary life. Before the clock struck 4, his wife's voice would cut through the dark of a sleeping house, and Thomas Edwin Bartlett would never wake again. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. It was the first day of January 1886, and winter lay heavy upon the Pimlico district of London. The streets of Claverton Street were quiet in the early hours, cobblestones slick with the cold of the season, gas lamps casting their pale amber circles into the dark, the distant muffled sounds of late revellers still abroad in more lively parts of the city. In the rooms above and below, ordinary lodgers slept as they had always slept. But on the first floor of number 85, something had gone terribly wrong in the night. Thomas Edwin Bartlett, 41 years of age, a prosperous grocer with interests in several London establishments, lay face down upon the bed, already cold when his wife woke beside him. He had complained of little the evening before. He had, in fact, eaten heartily and retired in better spirits than he had managed in weeks. The damp wool of winter clung to everything in that room. The coal had burned low, the air sharp with the chill of the new year. And yet the glass upon the mantelpiece held something that did not belong there. What that glass contained would change everything. Within weeks, it would bring the whole of London to a halt. Thomas Edwin Bartlett was born in the year 1845. He was a man of commerce and modest eccentricity, the owner of a small chain of grocery businesses across London, a partner in ventures that had returned him a comfortable income, and a person whose singular opinions about health, marriage, and the nature of companionship would later be examined with great scrutiny in the courts of England. He was, by the time his story reaches its terrible conclusion, 41 years old. He had been a husband for more than a decade. His wife was a woman of a very different kind. Adelaide Blanche Bartlett, known simply as Adelaide, had been born in France in the year 1855. Almost certainly in the city of Orleans, her origins were, from the beginning, shrouded in complexity. Her mother, Clara, née Chamberlain, was an Englishwoman of modest circumstances. Her father's identity was a matter of whispered speculation both before and after the trial. The name most frequently attached to him was Adolphus Collot de Thouars d'Escary, a pensioned naval officer of French extraction, a man of apparent standing whose connection to the young Adelaide was never publicly confirmed during her lifetime. What is recorded is that by 1860, Clara and her children had settled in London. By 1866, Clara was dead at 33 years of age, leaving Adelaide to navigate a world that had already asked much of her. Adelaide was, by the accounts of those who knew her, possessed of considerable intelligence and striking appearance. When she met Edwin Bartlett, she was a young woman of approximately 20 years. They were married on the 6th of April, 1875. It was not, even from the first, a conventional union. Edwin sent his new wife not to a marital home, but to a boarding school in Stoke Newington. From there, she was dispatched to a Protestant convent in Belgium, where the gaps in her education were to be remedied. Edwin, meanwhile, lived alone in his lodgings above his shop. It was not until 1878 that Adelaide returned to England permanently and took her place, at last, at her husband's side, at a residence in Herne Hill. There had been happiness, or something resembling it. Edwin's businesses flourished. Adelaide was regarded by those who encountered her as cultivated, devoted, and capable. But the household was not without its troubles. In 1881, after a long and difficult labour, a labour from which Edwin had refused to summon a physician, unwilling, it was said, to have another man present, Adelaide delivered a stillborn child. She would later state that, in the aftermath of this loss, the marriage became strictly platonic by mutual agreement. One small detail recorded in the trial testimony lingers. During his illness, in the months before his death, Adelaide sat with her husband through the long hours of the night. She held his toe, she told his physician, because Edwin would not settle unless she did. It is, in its way, the most human detail the case affords. Early in the year 1885, the Bartletts attended services at their local Wesleyan chapel and came to know the young minister there, the Reverend George Dyson, 27 years of age, a man of some learning and considerable personal warmth. The friendship that formed between the three of them was, by any ordinary measure of Victorian life, a peculiar one. Edwin encouraged it. He hired George Dyson to tutor his wife in Latin, mathematics, history, and geography. The minister visited the Bartlett household regularly, often spending the whole of the day there while Edwin was occupied with his businesses. A maid later testified that the pair behaved towards one another as a smitten couple. Edwin, by his own apparent arrangement, did not object. He purchased a season railway ticket for Dyson so that the minister might visit Adelaide more easily. He referred to Dyson, according to later testimony, as a kind of co-husband. He revised his will so that the prohibition against Adelaide remarrying was removed, a change made 4 months before his death. He encouraged it. He continued to encourage it. In late 1885, Edwin's health deteriorated sharply. His teeth were in a ruinous condition, the consequence of incompetent dental work that had left rotting stumps beneath his dentures. His physician, Dr. Alfred Leach, was called to attend him and diagnosed gastritis and diarrhea, conditions possibly complicated, though the sources are not entirely in agreement, by the effects of mercury, which Edwin may have been taking as a remedy for what he privately believed was a more serious ailment. The breath was foul, the condition worsening. Adelaide had moved from the shared bed to sleep at Edwin's feet, the better to tend to him through the night. He encouraged it. He continued to encourage it, and he grew weaker. On the 27th of December, 1885, Adelaide made a request of George Dyson. She asked him to procure chloroform for her. The stated reason was that Edwin suffered from internal paroxysms that his doctor did not understand, and that the chloroform would offer relief. Dyson, puzzled but willing, visited chemists in Putney and Wimbledon over several days. He purchased small quantities from multiple establishments, telling the pharmacists on each occasion that he needed the substance to remove grease stains. On the 29th of December, he combined his purchases and presented Adelaide with a 4-ounce bottle. On the 31st of December, Edwin returned from yet another dental appointment. He was said to be in good spirits. He ate a large meal that evening. At some point before 4 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of January, 1886, Adelaide Bartlett woke in the room she shared with her husband at number 85, Claverton Street, Pimlico. The precise hour is not known. What is known is that she first woke the maid and instructed her to fetch Dr. Alfred Leach at once. She then went to the room of Mr. and Mrs. Doggett, the proprietors of the house, and knocked upon their door. "Come down," she told them. "I think Mr. Bartlett is dead." Mr. Doggett descended to the first floor and found Thomas Edwin Bartlett lying face downward upon the bed. The body was already cold. There were no signs of disturbance in the room. There was no evidence of violence. Upon the mantelpiece, Mr. Doggett observed a glass, 3/4 filled with a liquid that smelled to him of brandy and ether. He did not immediately register its significance. He refused, however, to register the death, insisting instead that a post-mortem examination be conducted before any certificate was signed. Dr. Leach arrived and examined the body. He could find no obvious natural cause of death. Edwin had been unwell, it was true, but not so far advanced in any illness as to account for so sudden a collapse. Adelaide, when questioned by Dr. Leach about whether her husband might have taken poison of his own accord, replied that she would have known. She was certain, she said, that he had not. Edwin Bartlett's father, a man who had always regarded his daughter-in-law with deep suspicion, and who had, on a previous occasion, accused her of conducting an improper relationship with his younger son Frederick, was sent for. He arrived, and seeing everything before him, was not satisfied. He pressed the authorities to investigate. His pressure was effective. A post-mortem was ordered. On the 9th of January 1886, officers attended the premises at Claverton Street and recovered a small glass bottle from the Bartlett rooms. It had been inverted in a tumbler of Condy's fluid, a common disinfectant, and was broken in the process of recovery. The remnants of its contents were preserved for analysis. The community of Pimlico, which had observed the comings and goings of the Bartlett household with the quiet attention that neighbours invariably afford to the unusual, began now to observe something else: the measured, unhurried machinery of a murder investigation. The post-mortem examination of Thomas Edwin Bartlett was conducted following his death in the first days of January 1886. When the stomach of the deceased was opened, the examining physicians detected immediately the pronounced odour of chloroform. Analysis confirmed the presence of a fatal quantity of liquid chloroform within the stomach. No other poison was identified. No natural disease was found sufficient to cause death. What confounded the medical men, and what would confound the greatest forensic minds of Victorian England throughout the months that followed, was a single, inexplicable finding. Liquid chloroform, when swallowed, is a highly corrosive substance. It burns. It causes immediate and violent damage to the soft tissues of the mouth, the throat, and the larynx. Any person who ingested a fatal dose by drinking it would, in the ordinary course of medical science, bear unmistakable evidence of that passage in their body. Thomas Edwin Bartlett bore none. His mouth and throat were examined with care. There were no burns. There was no scarring of the larynx. There was no inflammation of the windpipe. The chloroform had reached the stomach without leaving any trace of the journey it must have taken to get there. The government's official analyst examined the recovered bottle and confirmed the presence of chloroform residue. The Home Office toxicologist, Dr. Thomas Stevenson, one of the foremost authorities on poison in England, was engaged to assist the prosecution. He studied the findings and stated that the cause of death was the chloroform and that the dose had been fatal. He could not, however, explain the absence of burns. George Dyson, informed of the post-mortem findings, came forward and admitted to his role in procuring the chloroform. He told the authorities everything he knew. His admission ended his intimacy with the widow and placed him at the centre of a case that had already ceased to be anything other than a matter of willful murder. Adelaide Bartlett, for her part, offered an account. She stated that she had used the chloroform to wave beneath her husband's face, to deter him from pressing his conjugal attentions upon her. She had not, she insisted, administered it internally. She had shown him the bottle. She had left it on the mantelpiece. She did not know how it had come to be inside him. It was an account that could neither be proved nor entirely disproved. If you're finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on this case below. Now, let's continue. On the 11th of February 1886, Adelaide Bartlett was formally arrested. The coroner's inquest, conducted under Mr. A. Braxton Hicks, returned a verdict of willful murder against Adelaide, with George Dyson named as an accessory before the fact. Both were taken into custody. The charges against Dyson, however, would not survive the opening of the trial. The inquest concluded its proceedings, the warrants were signed, and Adelaide Bartlett, widow, Frenchwoman, and now the most discussed woman in England, was remanded to await her day before the bar. The trial of Adelaide Bartlett opened on the 12th of April 1886 at the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, in the City of London. The case attracted press coverage on both sides of the Atlantic. One entrance to the court was entirely blocked by onlookers. The balconies surrounding the building were filled with spectators. Extra railings had been hastily erected. Within the courtroom, the atmosphere was one of compressed and expectant attention. The prosecution was conducted by the Attorney General of England and Wales, Sir Charles Russell. The defence was placed in the hands of Sir Edward Clarke. By common agreement among those who knew the law, one of the most formidable barristers of the late Victorian era. That Clarke had taken the brief was itself a matter of speculation. It was rumoured that Adelaide's mysterious father had arranged it, though the nature of his involvement was never publicly established. Whatever the origin of the instruction, Clarke brought to the case everything at his disposal. At the opening of proceedings, the charges against George Dyson were formally withdrawn. He was acquitted at the bar and immediately called as a prosecution witness, a position from which it would transpire he would do more for the defence than for the Crown. Dyson testified that Adelaide had never sought to conceal the purchase of chloroform. She had not asked him to be secretive. She had not behaved in his observation as a woman with guilty knowledge. He confirmed that Edwin had believed himself to be terminally ill. Under the subtle management of Sir Edward Clarke, Dyson's testimony, taken as a whole, bolstered the theory of suicide rather than murder. Dr. Leach testified as to the extraordinary care Adelaide had taken of her husband during his illness. He told the court that Edwin had been, in his view, hysterical in temperament, a man whose mental state could not be discounted in any consideration of the manner of his death. Adelaide herself was not permitted to take the stand. Under the law as it then stood, a defendant could not give sworn evidence on their own behalf, a limitation that would not be removed until the Criminal Evidence Act of 1898. The defence offered a 6-hour closing address. The jury withdrew to deliberate. They returned. The foreman spoke. Although we think grave suspicion is attached to the prisoner, we do not think there is sufficient evidence to show how or by whom the chloroform was administered. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted in rapturous applause. She walked out of the Old Bailey in her widow's weeds, and London watched her go. Public opinion, which had been divided at the outset of the trial, had moved steadily in Adelaide's favour over the 6 days of proceedings. The crowds outside the court, whose presence had necessitated the erection of extra railings, received the verdict of acquittal as a kind of vindication, not merely of the woman herself, but of something more difficult to name. A collective unease, perhaps, about the certainty with which the prosecution had pursued her in the absence of any explanation of how the crime had been committed, or whether it had been a crime at all. The newspapers of the day, both in the United Kingdom and across the Atlantic, had reported the case exhaustively. The details had made exceptional reading. The ménage à trois, encouraged by a dying man, the Wesleyan minister purchasing chloroform in backstreet chemists, the inexplicable absence of burns, the whispering of platonic marriages and secret arrangements. A Victorian public, accustomed to sensation, had found, in the Pimlico Mystery, something that exceeded even its considerable appetite. Among the medical establishment, the fascination was of a rather different quality. The famous surgeon Sir James Paget, confronted with the forensic impossibility at the heart of the case, framed his response in terms that have endured ever since. Now that she has been acquitted for murder and cannot be tried again, he stated, she should tell us, in the interest of science, how she did it. It was the admission of a profession baffled, and it was the sharpest possible acknowledgement that the question the trial had been convened to answer remained, after all of its proceedings, entirely open. Dr. Leach, in a letter to the medical journal The Lancet, offered one theory, that Edwin himself had taken the chloroform out of spite, after Adelaide had revealed to him that she intended to use it to resist his advances. Edward Clarke, the man who had saved her, remained publicly committed to the view that it was suicide. Neither theory has ever been established. Adelaide Bartlett vanished from public life following her acquittal. The novelist Julian Simons, in his later fictionalization of the case, proposed that she emigrated to the United States, settled in Connecticut, and lived on until some point after 1933. Whether that is correct is not known. Whatever answers she carried with her, she took them into silence. George Dyson, the minister who had purchased the chloroform in 4 small bottles and told the chemists it was for stains, also disappeared from the public record. Methodist Church records suggest he emigrated to Australia. Other accounts propose a different fate, though those accounts rest on no verified source. The house at 85 Claverton Street still stands in Pimlico. The glass upon the mantelpiece has long since been broken, washed away, or lost to time, 3/4 full, smelling of brandy and something else, noticed on the morning of the 1st of January 1886 by a man who did not know what he was looking at. It is not recorded what became of its contents, or whether anyone ever thought to ask the question before it was too late. Some mysteries do not ask to be solved, they ask only to be remembered.